Good afternoon, everybody. Have you had a nice lunch? Yeah? Good. Well, I'm here this afternoon to talk to you about improving access, adapting the curriculum and classroom for pupils with autism. You will see from your notes that there were supposed to be two of us today, but unfortunately Teresa Allen has gone down with the flu. She's very poorly in bed, so you've just got me for this afternoon. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, where I'm from. My name's Nik Morgan. I'm from the Communication and Autism team in Birmingham, and we're an outreach team that work predominantly in mainstream schools, supporting children and young people in from 5 right through to 16. We support children and young people with significant communication difficulties in the primary age range, but we are really looking at those young people who are perhaps on the way to a diagnosis. And part of the reason for that is, as you would understand, is that we want to get in and start some early interventions with those young people. In our secondary provision, in the secondary provisions in Birmingham, we do only work with children and young people who have a diagnosis, and part of the reason for that is that we find it actually it's very difficult to work with young people coming from a communication and autism team if they're not actually recognising their own diagnosis. So that's one of the reasons why we look for the diagnosis in the secondary provision. We currently have about 2,300 children referred to the team across Birmingham, and that's just in mainstream settings. So there's a significant number of young people in the mainstream settings that we're trying to support, and we're trying to hopefully support the schools to adapt curriculums and classrooms to support those young people. We are also an Autism Education Trust training hub, and I saw that later this afternoon Steve Huggett is going to be talking about the Autism Education Trust. If you do one thing from today, after listening here today, and you go back to your settings, I would say go and have a look at the AET website. There's some really good information, some really good resources on there. One to mention right at the beginning is the National Autism Standards, and if you haven't seen this document, it is a very, very useful document about looking about how you can adapt settings to support children and young people on the autism spectrum. Okay? Within there are lots of resources that you can access online as well. And in my presentation today, I will be using some slides that come from the AET training, as well as some of our own slides. And as Steve will explain, there's 3 levels of training that are available to settings to support them to develop the support for children and young people on the autistic spectrum. So, why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about adapting the curriculum? Well, one of the things that we talk about in our training now is we're talking about a difference, not deficit model. Okay? So we're thinking about all the young people that are on the spectrum as being individuals who are also on the autism spectrum. So those are the young people that we're working with. Those are the young people that we're going to adapt the curriculum for. Those are the pupils that we're going to adapt the classroom for. Why are we doing it? Well, we're doing it because we know that's part of the Equality Act. We have to make reasonable adjustments for children and young people on the autistic spectrum. And it's important that we remember that those reasonable adjustments need to be in place before those young people arrive. And I heard this little anecdote, I suppose, the other day, which I thought kind of really summed it up. If you think about a young person who perhaps needs a wheelchair to get around in, and you say to that child, oh yes, you can come to our school, you can come to our setting, but you're not going to have your wheelchair to start off with. Okay? Maybe by the 3rd week in, we'll get you a seat. And maybe by the 4th week, we'll get you a wheel. And maybe by the 10th week, you'll get 2 wheels. And then you'll be able to access the entire site. And for a lot of the young people that we work with, that's kind of what it feels like a lot of the time. There's a lot of things, there's a lot of differences that we can make, and they're not rocket science things, they're just some little things that we need to do to make the curriculum, to make the environment more accessible for these young people. So hopefully today. I will give you some insight into and some practical suggestions around the classroom environment and how we can adapt the curriculum. And I do like that quote from Albert Einstein. I don't teach anyone, I only provide them with the environment which they can learn. And hopefully that's what we're all here to do and all wanting to do, is create environments in which the young people that come to our settings can achieve, can progress and can attain while they're at those settings. And that's what hopefully I'll be able to talk some more about today. Now, I think this is fundamental really for us, in that we need to know what the 4 areas are that we need to support, and the staff within our settings need to know what the 4 areas are that we're going to that we need to look to support these young people. And I'm not going to apologise for going through them again, and if you're saying I already know that thing, again, I think it's just reinforcing the idea that we need to be imparting this knowledge to the people that are working with this group of young people. So it's about the people working with these children on the spectrum understanding that they have a social communication difficulty. Understanding that this is a group of young people who may not understand the gestures that people are using, the body language that they're using. They may not understand the tone of voice in which that information is being presented to them. So that we change the way in which we present, or we know that when we are presenting, we need to think about this group of young people and adapt the way in which we do to ensure that they're not getting lost in our understanding of how that class might normally react to that. And I always say, it's that thing of, on a Friday afternoon when I was teaching in a special school, lots of the young people could recognise Mr. Morgan's grumpy face. They could see that body language. They understood what that meant. But for a significant number of the young people who we work with on the spectrum, they'll not be picking up on those clues. They won't be learning from those. And that's when staff sometimes say, that's that young person being rude to me. They're not responding in the way that I want them to. But we've got to say to that member of staff, because that young person is on the spectrum, we've got to think, have they got a social communication difficulty with understanding what I'm trying to put over? Those social understandings, we need to have an understanding about that. We need to know the fact that these young people might not be able to understand how others are feeling at a particular time. They might not know how to start that conversation with their peers. And so often we put them into situations where we're trying to enable them to have a social activity, which in fact is really difficult to do. And it may be that they're finding it difficult to form friends as well. Interest and information processing, I think again what we need to remember with this is that the children and young people we're working with may well have an uneven profile within their learning. So they might be the young people that are actually your A-star students. They may be those pupils that you think and that staff feel really understand what's going on in that classroom. But in fact, they understand the subject, but they might not understand exactly what they are supposed to do with the information that comes to them. And I think that's really important, that the fact that we can't say that skills are going to be generalised, so that people have to know that what is learnt in one situation maybe have to be retaught in another situation. And the fact, and this is, we'll come back with it through the presentation, that passion for interests is something that is an incredibly good motivator for children and young people on the spectrum. And that if we can use that, we can enthuse those young people into perhaps areas that they're finding difficult. And then the fourth area, that of sensory processing, and how some young people are hypersensitive, so they're highly sensitive to noises, hearing, sight, smell, taste, the vestibular, the proprioception, or they might be hyposensitive, having low sensitivity. And I think about that standing here today with the lights glaring in my eyes and the humming from the machines. It's a little bit off-putting if you're honest. And you can see how if that's a young person in a in a classroom, in a situation, that could be detrimental to their learning. And what we're after is ensuring that those children and young people are actually able to learn, achieve and progress through their careers in school. And I think it's important that we remember that this can be wherever this young person is, because we're talking about, you know, as you'll know, we're talking about a lifelong condition, and we're talking about something that we need to think about from those early stages right through their school career, through transitions into secondary provision, through into further education and higher education, and actually that being something that is supporting moving on into work placements, into actually getting a job. And I think it's, you know, there's only 15% is the figure that goes around of adults with autism are actually currently in work. And I think that, you know, that's a very, very low number. And I think that we need to be saying what we do throughout that young person's school career is important for them, because it's going to enable them to ultimately go out into that workplace and succeed in life as well. And from the AET work that was done prior to the training being set up, they actually asked some young people, what are the things that you think would make a positive difference to your school? And I don't think those are surprising things that the young people have come up with. And what I would say is that all the sorts of things that I'm going to talk about, and all the sort of things that the young people talk about, are things that will help a majority of children, I think, in a classroom. So good practice for teaching children and young people on the autism spectrum is good practice for teaching children and young people. But this is the big factor for me. This is the thing. Why do we do this? Why are we actually thinking about changing that curriculum? Because of the anxiety that can be built up within a young person, because of the barriers, of the differences they may have in those 4 areas that I just talked about. So it's really important that we think of anxiety as being a barrier to learning, and that everything we do is reducing that anxiety. Now, I've been asked to finish by 10 to 3 today, so that you can get out and have a cup of coffee at 3 o'clock before you come back to the last part of today. Imagine if you didn't know that, okay? Imagine if you didn't know that this man was going to stop talking, okay? He's going to be up on this stage and he's going to keep talking. Is he ever going to stop? Your anxiety levels might start to raise, okay? You're thinking, oh, I'm going to be gagging for a cup of coffee by then. If I don't get a cup of coffee, that's going to make me feel really terrible for the rest of the day. How, you know, you've got all your plans, you've got all your thoughts in your head about what you're going to do with the rest of your day. I can reduce your anxiety by saying, at 10 to 3, I will stop and ask you if you've got any questions. Okay? The feeling of that reduction in anxiety is really important, because if we don't reduce that anxiety, it can lead, or it can drive, behaviours that we don't want to see. And when we talk about behaviours, I always like to talk about behaviours that challenge us. Rather than having that term challenging behaviours, it's a behaviour that challenges us, because it's how it makes us feel at that moment in time when we are trying to deal with that behaviour. Okay? So if we reduce anxieties, we are less likely to see behaviours that may challenge us, because we're all individuals, we're all challenged by different things at different times. But if we can support the young person to reduce their anxieties, we will hopefully not see some of those behaviours that might challenge us. And by adapting the curriculum, by looking at the way in which we develop our classrooms, we can do that and reduce that anxiety down. So, to begin with, we're going to look at the classroom environment, and we're going to look at the physical environment, the sensory environment, and the social and emotional environment that children and young people are involved in while they're in their school classrooms. So, to begin with, excuse me, the physical environment. I think it is really important that we allow these young people to understand what is going to happen where. Because quite often, again, as I talked about earlier, when we think about generalising skills, and this can be from from younger children, children in specialist settings, right through to those children doing A-star, A-level work at secondary school. If we can give them a structure so they know what's happening where, we will be reducing those anxieties. So I think it's really important that we think about ensuring that our classroom structure is in such a way that we know where things happen. And I'll show you a few examples of those in a minute. I think we do need to be visual, and we need to remember that visual clues can continue to work throughout that young person's career, throughout that young person's school career, and into a further career. And you can use visual cues to support that young person throughout their time in school. And it's one of those things that really does work. And we know it works because we go in time after time into school settings, and where we've got visual clues, visual information for those young people, it makes a big difference. And again, we will need to avoid that clutter. We'll need to avoid that distraction that some classrooms do have. And that's difficult sometimes because these young people will be in primary classrooms that are asked to be bright, energetic classroom environments that stimulate the pupils. So sometimes it's about thinking how we can adapt that environment for that young person to make it individual for them. So if we have a low arousal area within a classroom, that is something that they can use, somewhere that they can go, that they're not going to be distracted, so they can carry on with their work. So here, I got these from the Autism for Teachers website, which is I thought was very useful and really did show that the extent to which it's not, again, as I was saying before, it's not rocket science stuff, it's just simple things. So visual boundaries, so that you know where you're going to work, where you're going to do your activity. Dividers to provide areas for workstations. So if you have got that environment that is bright and stimulating for the other young people, it may be that you need to provide an area that is less stimulating for the young person with autism because of those issues they may have with sensory issues. It's about being clear about what's going to happen and where it's going to happen. So visual clues for listening, visual clues for class jobs, visual clues for one-to-one areas, and times and things when you can do things, so you know that this is not the time to go into the play area, or this is not the time to go into the reading area. Okay, so it's those sort of cues that keep everybody knowing where and when and how things are going to happen. And again, some more examples just showing some independent work areas, those visual schedules that individuals may need, few distractions in there, and again, those boundaries, tapes on the floor. It is amazing how well that works for creating an area that you know is your area. And in some ways it's somewhere that you can work and you can be relaxed in, you can reduce that anxiety in. And that can work for those most difficult of situations. So when you have a class in a games lesson, in a hall, taped off areas are the ones that allow that child to know where they are, what they can do at any particular time within that bounded area. And again, some more examples of the visual clues for those young people. So within that structure, we talked about a timetable of the day, but I think that is very important that we have that, so we know what is going to happen and when it's going to happen. Because one of the issues that raises anxiety for a considerable number of young people on the spectrum is not knowing what's going to happen next. That idea that he's never going to give up talking. So it's a now, it's when it's going to finish, it's what's going to happen next, it's giving structure to the day. And where things go wrong, where things can be different, so, you know, I always think this time of year is one of those unbelievable times of year where you can come into school, you would normally be doing your literacy lesson and then your maths lesson, and then all of a sudden you've done your literacy lesson and then all of a sudden you're sitting watching infants dressed as sheep, and You know, it's a strange world that we're all of a sudden putting young people into, something that's may cause them anxiety. And that's when we see these young people, then their anxiety levels are building up. That's when we then see the behaviour. And that's when that poor young person has actually had to leave that situation, the infant practice for the Christmas play, because they've become too anxious. And because we've put them in that situation and we haven't given them an opportunity to know that this is going to be okay and we'll go back to normal. So I think timetabling is really important, and really important when things change. And that means that we have to set the class up, as we talked, with visual support, with boundaries. We have to be organised, and we have to know what's going to happen within our day. Keep it consistent. And I think the thing about this as well is that we need to think about how we impart that knowledge to other members of staff who are coming in. So if you have a school where you have different members of staff coming in to a classroom to teach, you need to have that consistent approach. You need a way in which you can communicate that between the adults so that they are enabling that young person to have a consistent approach. Otherwise, again, that's when the anxiety levels will build up. I think it's really important that we collect data, that we actually look at the successes that young person's having, because quite often these are the young people that we're always seeing the negatives about when things go wrong. We see the ABC charts, we see this incident happened, why did it happen, what was the trigger? But I think we have to think about the successes as well. What's gone really well? Why did that go really well? Oh, it went really well because we had this organised timetable, because they worked in that workstation for that session, so they had a low arousal. So I think it's really important that we look at that and be able then to look at the results that come from that as well. Is that young person achieving better because we've changed the environment in which they're working? And that is, for me, again, that's a really important part of what we do, because sometimes people say, but if I do that, if he has a workstation, or if he has to wear a set of ear mufflers, ear defenders, that makes him look different. Okay? But it certainly makes him look different if because of the anxiety levels, because of the noise levels in the room, because of the distractions around them, he's kicking a chair over, he's calling an effing so-and-so and storming out the classroom. That makes him look different. We can make things better by thinking about what are those positive things we can look for. How can we ensure that what we do shows good results for that young person? And if they're in the classroom, then they're more likely to be achieving, they're more likely to be attaining, and they're more likely to be showing progression. If they're out the classroom, they're not going to be doing that. Have a written plan. Write down who does what, where and when in the classroom. So it's not ad hoc. It's knowing that we could talk a little bit about TAs at the end of the presentation today, but it's about knowing who is going to be working with that young person when. What's the purpose of what's going on at that time? Because again, that will allow that young person to have a reduction in anxiety, that will allow that young person to actually be able to access the curriculum around them. And have some profiles, going back to that communication. You know, you so often see in classrooms, you see a picture on the wall saying that this child has a nut allergy. Don't feed them nuts because they'll die. Yeah? We need that information for the children and young people that we're working with on the autistic spectrum. We need to know if they've got a nut allergy, but we also need to know what are those things that we have seen that are going to cause their anxiety levels to rise. What are the processes we use to reduce that, so that when the supply teacher comes in, they know that information. They have that information to hand. It says what the script is, if we need to use a script to calm that young person down. I'm here to help. I can see you're upset. If we sit calmly, we can work this out. But everybody needs to be consistent. They need to be saying it in the same way at the same time every time. So know that individual, and profiles are a really good way of doing that. And again, if you go to the standards document, there are examples of profiles on there that you can download and be able to use. So, coming on to those sensory issues. You know, we know that what Claire's talking about here is true. We know that there is so much input around us all the time that it can impact on us, on the way in which we can perceive the world because of the sensory difficulties that we may have. And remembering that each individual will have different barriers that are put up because of their sensory issues. And again, those are the sort of things that we need to be putting onto profiles, so that everybody who's involved with that child knows that there are those difficulties there for them. This is the information that we need to get. And sometimes what we forget to do is we forget to ask the young person what they are. We're busy doing our observations, or we're busy doing what we think is the best thing to do, and we forget to actually ask the young person what it is. I was working with a young man 2 days ago, and we were working on his emotion chart and his emotion scale about what worried him and what didn't worry, and when he was very, very worried and when he was less worried. And something that I'd never thought about that was worrying him, was a real big worry, was a trombone. A trombone was an instrument that he was being asked to play in a music lesson, in a class music lesson. And he was so anxious about this trombone because of the sounds that it made and how he thought people might think that he was making those sounds. Okay? But until I asked him that question, nobody actually knew that was one of those issues that was actually causing him anxiety and stopping him being able to take part effectively in that lesson. So sometimes within all these things, it really is a good idea to talk to the young people that we're working with. And again, within the autism standards, there is a sensory audit document that you can do within your setting. I've just got a quick example of one. I'm not sure whether you'll be able to see that very well on there, but it's about things like, the fluorescent lights, are they regularly checked and changed? The flickering lights can be disturbing. The effects of lights coming on in a room through blinds and creating distractions. The light reflecting off objects. So these are the sort of things, and there's a whole set within there that you can go through and actually do an audit for the young people in your setting to see, is there something that we can change? Is there some way in which we can position that young person so they're not looking at the blinds, so that at 11 o'clock when the sun comes across, you're getting that streaming light coming through? Is there something we can do to change that? Because when that happens, that's when he seems to be not being able to focus on that maths activity. So then we move into the social and emotional environment. I think this is really important as well, because it does require a huge effort for these young people to understand this social environment that they're in. They will find it difficult to read the emotions and intentions of their peers, of staff around them, of people around them. They may not understand those social rules. I mean, my favourite one is bogey picking. It happens a lot. There's a lot of bogey picking goes on, especially with boys. That green bogey on the end of the finger, where's it going to go? Oh, I don't want it on the end of my finger. It'll do very nicely on you. Thank you very much. It's something that we have to think about, and we have to support those young people, because you can see where it can lead to difficulties with peers. It may be that young person who is 4 or 5 is a big hugger. They're a great big hugger. And they give everybody that comes into that room a hug. And it is, that's cute when they're 4 or 5. When they're 6 or 7, it's a bit more annoying. When they're 14, 15, it can be perceived as something completely different. And it's about how because we have that knowledge that this young person might not understand that social environment which they're in, that's when we can start to work with them to be implicit in our teaching around those things. Oops, sorry. A place full of confusing rules, conflicting standards, strange and unpredictable happenings. And I will talk a little bit about a young girl that we work with in secondary school, and she kind of sums this up. She was told by the staff that all the girls in her year, in her secondary setting, were told that you are not allowed to go out through the hole in the fence at the back of school and have a fag. That's the rule. You're not allowed to do that. So when two of her friends went out through the hole in the fence and had a fag, she felt it was her responsibility to go and tell the teaching staff that those young people had done that, because that was the rule. Now, in that social context, she then had a lot of difficulty with that group of girls because she had dubbed them in. She told on them, okay? And that extended itself into the Facebook world, that I think is a really complicated one for any young person to navigate. But certainly for this young person, it was even worse, because this torment, if you like, continued on outside of school, and she had no idea how to balance the social rules, the social element of being with her friends, and that rules and the social elements of being within school. And I think that is something that we have to think about, because otherwise we do put these young people into situations that are difficult to them. So if we do have, you know, how do you explain it? I don't know. I don't know how you get over that here's the rule of the school and here's the rule of the playground. But we have to be able to support that young person. We have to know that that can be something that they will find difficult. And so we provide opportunities to engage in social interactions. We recognise their strengths and weaknesses. We provide that individual support. And we support staff and peers to understand how to communicate and engage with those pupils. And again, I think that's really, really important that we don't just think about it as being something that we do to the child, to the young person. It's about what we do ourselves that changes us is important. I think, you know, coming back to the difference, not deficit. Okay, we're not changing the individual, we're changing the environment that causes that individual distress and anxiety that will reduce their ability to learn. And if we change, we can do that, and we can support peers to understand that as well. And again, if you are interested, if you go on the AET website, there's a package that is done on there that's called the Awesomes Programme, and it's a peer awareness programme which looks at superheroes, and the superheroes have barriers that they have and positives that they bring, and two of the superheroes are on the autistic spectrum. And again, it's a really good tool to work with peers, for peers to understand what the barriers may be for their friends around them who are on the autistic spectrum. And this is a biggie, I think, the difference between the opinion about where these behaviours, where these barriers lie in school and home. Because quite often, school is a place that has good rules and perhaps has an environment that is structured. And the children and young people, actually, the behaviour within schools is not what's being reported from parents at home. And sometimes there's a tension, because schools say, well, there isn't anything that we can do. There isn't anything that we can change because they're absolutely fine at school. Where parents are saying, no, this young person, they're coming home and they're an absolute nightmare at home. They're so upset, they're so anxious about what's gone on in the day. And it may be that young person has managed to hold it together, but it's as if they're still picking up those anxieties throughout the day, putting them in that imaginary bin, and then they're getting home and they're emptying it out. And it's about us saying, okay, if we want this young person to be in school, to learn, to achieve, to progress, we can support that as well. We can make little changes that can do that. Because if they're anxious at home and they're not sleeping, or they're up all night long, that is going to affect them when they come to school. It can affect all sorts of dynamics within there. And sometimes the simple things like, that, I don't quite like the phrase end of the day book, it sounds a bit apocalyptic, but it's a book at the end of the day that you fill in the good things that have happened. Yeah? Not the bad things that have happened, the good things that have happened. It's remembering the positive things. So that's that last thing you take home at the end of the day is a positive, you know. And sometimes these young people say, nothing good happened. And they say, well, I saw Jenny smiled at you this afternoon when you were doing maths and you were in a group. She smiled at you. Why do you think she smiled at you? She smiled at you because she likes you. You know, we're going back to bringing those young people into the social environment that perhaps they won't understand. Then they go home. Then the first thing they can say to their mum or their dad when they get home is, oh, this is the good thing that happened to me today. Because so often these are the young people that come home with all the negative things, all the baggage from the day. So we can make a difference even within our school setting, even for that home environment, because we're making it better, we're making it less anxious when they get home as well. And that way, hopefully, those anxieties will be lessened at home and we'll see that positiveness come through back into school as well. So, moving on to the communicative environment. They might find it difficult to initiate conversations. They might have difficulty using verbal and non-verbal language. There might be difficulties with attending and understanding instructions and explanations, tuning into that relevant aspect of what somebody's trying to get over and understanding those abstract concepts. They may have that literal understanding of the world around them as well. So that can lead to not realizing that you're part of a group. Okay? And again, this is where we need to be proactive in the way in which we set groups up. Give everybody in the group a role. Say somebody, if we're going to have a group activity, somebody is the scribe, somebody is going to be feeding back. Have a role set up there within it, as we do as adults in training sessions, so that we know so they know exactly what they're going to do as part of that group. Progressing that conversation from a single topic, from their own interest. Sometimes we need to be able to say, we need to let somebody else have a turn. We need to actually set up that social group to practice these skills. You know, repairing the breakdowns when they happen. And I think that is really important. Again, going back to the behaviours, you know, I always say that, you know, if somebody is throwing a chair at you, it's the start of a conversation. Somewhere we've got to go back and finish that conversation. We've got to find out why. We can't just leave that there. But we've got to be able to do that. We've got to not say that's for the young person to do. We've got to be able to do that ourselves. Understanding when to ask for help. You know, if you have, I talked about that uneven profile. You know, if you have that student that is absolutely brilliant at maths, but is on the spectrum, it may be that they don't know how to ask for help when they are stuck. And we presume that because they're absolutely brilliant at maths, they're just getting on with it and they're doing it. So again, it's building in, it's us saying, because I know that this young person is on the spectrum, I need to build that in to some piece of work I do with them so that they know how to do that. Okay? I will talk to them. How are you going to ask me a question if you don't know something? What's going to be the way in which you indicate that? Are you going to have a little card that you put on the table to say that you don't understand? Is it going to be a fact that you set a time aside at the end of that session or the end of the day for them to come and talk to you? There's all different ways of doing it because of each individual is different, but we need to think about how we're going to do those things so that we can be sure that they do know how to ask for help, that they do know how to get your attention if they're not sure how that is themselves. And understanding those hints and vague forms of conversations, and we do them all the time. And I'm a bit of a rambler, as you can see, you know. And I've had young people saying to me, "Nick, stop talking. Just give me some time to think about what you're talking about." Okay, and it really makes you go, "Oh yeah, I'm off again." We can't all be perfect all the time. I'm told that quite often, but it's about thinking, if we know that young person's on the spectrum, what can we do? What can we do to ensure that they are clear in their understandings? So we're going to use simple and concise language. We are going to call their name first. You know, it's such a simple thing. If I say, go and get the books and bring them over here, Nick, I haven't thought about that I'm involved in that conversation until I've heard my name. In our house, it's, can you do the washing up, Nick? And I'm not involved in the conversation until I've heard my name. But if it's Nick, can you do the washing up? Nick, can you go and get the books and bring them over here? It's that little bit of instant recognition that I'm involved in what's going on. It's about being calm. It's about being quiet. It's about being confident. If you know you've got a young person who has sensory issues, the last thing they're going to need is that loud, bombastic person standing up in front of them with their arms going. So you have to think about what you're doing, and we have to talk to staff about how they might be doing that and how that might be affecting that young person. And again, this is where we could come back with how we use our TAs and how we use observations within that to support us knowing what we're like. Because normally we don't have a video camera in the back of the room, and maybe we should sometimes, just to be able to say, look back at it and go, God, you do wave your arms about a lot, you know? So that, you know, is something that we need to think about, and we need to ask our staff to think about as well. Realising that shifting attention may take time. So if we're saying do this and then do that, doing that, you might have forgotten what you were doing over here on the this. Okay, so we need to be explicit in saying and giving time to say, we're doing this now, we're going to do this for this amount of time, and then we're going to move on to this. We're going to do that for that amount of time. And then we might be going back to this thing, but we're explicit in it. We're saying that we understand that it might take time in shifting that attention. And again, add meaning, use those symbols, use those signs, use the drawings, use the objects, all the things that we know help the young people. So, I'm going to move on a little bit now to adapting the curriculum. And so, the environment, how we're doing that, what we're actually doing to the curriculum. So, just special interests. Underused in a lot of settings, from my perspective at any rate. It's about raising that self-esteem, it's about using something that that young person understands, and also one of those things that can reduce anxieties and reduce upset as well. And I do like the picture of the cards, because my colleague Teresa, who can't be here today, one of the examples she uses is that she had a young man and they were talking about some difficult things about what he was going to do with his subjects in school and where he wanted to go to them. And he actually got very upset about that. But the pack of cards was one of the things that was that he loved playing cards, and she just said, just sort those into suits for me. And just the physical act of doing that was something that he was interested in, calmed him down. Again, it's not rocket science, it's just knowing your individual. And so if that's on his profile, everybody then knows that if Nick's getting upset, cards are a good way to reduce that anxiety, bring them down. Know that, have it in that profile. And John sort of sums it up here. And if you haven't seen John speak at all, I would very recommend going to see him speak. He's an inspirational speaker, but he does like his buzzies, as we say in Birmingham. Spelt wrong there, so he should have a Z in there somewhere. And it is interesting, the difference that little things can do. You know, you probably know that Star Wars Lego is big up there as a favourite of lots of lads on the spectrum. Star Wars Lego is a favourite. I was working with a young man a couple of weeks ago who was just adamant he wasn't going to do this literacy work. But when we stuck a picture of a Lego Darth Vader on the top of the sheet, that had nothing to do with what he was doing in the subject, but just was there, and the next one had a Lego Stormtrooper on it, He wanted to do the work so he could collect the pictures of the Lego Star Wars characters. So that little bit of motivation, again, not rocket science, we don't have to go with the thing. It's a great detail about things, come up with things. So he says, okay, let's get some pictures of Lego Star Wars characters, stick them on the things he's going to do. And say that when he's completed the work, he can keep that piece of work and have a photocopy of it with the Lego Star Wars character on it. And it made a big difference because it motivated him, it got him into doing what he wanted to do, it made it exciting for him because it was something that he was interested in as well. And I think this is an interesting part to debate because I think it's how and when we talk with young people about the appropriateness of their interests. And I did work with a young man in Birmingham who went on, he went through school and he's about 20, I don't know, he's in his mid-20s now. But he was starting to go to pubs with his mates. It was great. He was beginning, he was starting to have a social life out of a social group that he would go out and they'd go to the pub with. His special interest though was Barbie dolls. Now taking a Barbie doll into a pub in some pubs in Birmingham is not the best thing in the world to do. So we did have to start to have a conversation about when and how he would keep up his special interest. We don't want to take his special interest away, but we were just saying, this we might need not to have that special interest when we're going to the pub. Because of, there are some people in pubs in Birmingham that find that harder to handle than, others of us. So, that was something that is that we do have to take into consideration. But it is important to remember that they can be so precious, so important, that they can be such a motivator to the young people that we're working with. And I think that is, sometimes it's underused. And again, this is where we need to start the conversations. It's about finding out what does interest that young person, what it is that actually they really like doing. I say there's lots of people like Lego Star Wars, but there's a huge range of different things. I did work with a young man who knew every sort of toilet system in the country. You could name every Armitage Shank toilet bowl, and not quite sure how I put that into the curriculum, but it's what we do, isn't it? So it's what we know about that individual, and then again what we impart onto consistently to the people around us, so that everybody knows that that's the motivator, that's the thing that will help, that's the thing that will support that young person and perhaps reduce those anxieties sometimes. So we're going to now have a look at some of the general differentiation that we might look at for these young people. And, we know that we'll have to think about the instructions given, the task itself, the resources often, and the peer and adult involvement around these young people. Because we know that's going to be different, because we know about the 4 areas of difference, and we know that those can be barriers. So we're going to be thinking about what we're going to do to support that young person. They're going to need some support in planning and organising their work. They're going to need to have some support in seeing the point of work. And I think this is a really interesting one as well. And for some of the older, again, this tends to be, I'm going to generalise, but for a lot of the boys that I've worked with in secondary settings, they don't see the point of school. They don't see the point of coming to the lesson. They don't see the point of going to French because they don't like the French teacher. They don't like the point of going to history because that history teacher asks questions. Asks me questions. I've come here to learn. He's asking me questions. Well, what do I need to come here for? They're not getting the point of why they're in school. In the standards document, in the curriculum, adapting the curriculum, there's a little project in there that's about pathways to work. And it's something that we use quite early on, around about year 9, we start to work with some of the young people. And it's about, part of what we do is we say, what do you want to do? What is the thing you want to do when you leave school? And they go, what? What do you mean do something when I leave school? And when we unpick that, you see, then when you leave school, you're going to want to get a job. Oh, yeah, I never thought of that. I'm going to actually have to go and do some work. What are you going to do? I'm going to be a racing car driver. Oh, so how are you going to become a racing car driver? Oh, I'm going to get discovered. Okay, how are you going to get discovered? Well, I'm going to sit at home on my Xbox, playing the racing car games, and I'll get discovered because I'm really good at that. So we unravel that, we unpick it a bit, and we come back and say, okay, well, what's the first thing you're going to need to do? What could be a good thing that you could do? Oh, I'm going to need to get a driving license. I'm like, oh, that's a good thing. What age are you going to do that at? Okay, well, to get a driving license, you're going to need to be able to read and understand the test, for the written test and the thing. Now, that's why, you can see where I'm going. Yeah? It's about giving a point to things and giving a pathway. And sometimes there are barriers. There are barriers. We had a young man who wanted to go into the Air Force. He wanted to become a pilot. But because of his diagnosis, that got to a point where that was stopped. Yeah? He wasn't allowed to go any further. Now, had we let him get to that point, that could have been, a really distressing time for him. But we looked at the different options that he could do within that. And he's actually now doing his apprenticeship, electrical aviation engineering with the RAF. So there was a different route that we were able to get there. He was adamant that this is what we was going to do, but he found a different way. And we could come back to the point, okay, you're going to need to get your maths. You're going to need to get your English to be able to get onto that course. So it gave a point to work. So this pathway idea, I think, is a really good way of beginning to think about what's the point of work and where we can go with it. But coming back, it's about knowing about what's the relevant information and how we can ensure that happens for these young people and how we plan that out. What are we going to use in the classrooms to do that? Are we going to use writing frames? Where do we put this piece of information? Support around that social aspect of task. How are we going to ensure, because we know that they're on the spectrum, how are we going to know that they know how to interact with that group unless we do something to support that? Doing the same work in different ways, negotiating with others. These are the things that we're going to have that these young people may have some difficulty with. And they certainly will quite often have a difficulty with seeing the point of homework. Because you go to school to do work and you don't go at home to do work, because that's when I'll be playing my Xbox to get discovered as a racing car driver. Okay, so it's about giving the point to homework, and perhaps sometimes, because we know we have to make reasonable adjustments, about saying, okay, how can we do homework in a different way? Can you do homework at the end of the day in school? Can you stay in school and do your homework? Is there a way in which we can be flexible around those sort of things? Is there a way in which we can say you only have to do homework for a certain amount of time? It's okay if you don't finish it. Because this is the young person that's got the anxieties, because teachers said, I need to do my homework, I need to get this finished. If I don't get it finished, I'm going to get a detention. So 7 hours at home later of going on with a piece of work that they don't understand because it hasn't been explained properly to them is no use to anybody. So if we rewind that and say, actually, you are going to do 15 minutes of homework, and you're going to do this in this 15 minutes of time. We want to see this, this and this. Are you clear about that? Yes. And it's okay to stop. You don't have to ask mum, you don't have to ask dad. You time it. After 15 minutes, you're done. Bring that in. There's your reasonable adjustment. There's getting some homework. There's reducing the anxiety. There's allowing them to have time to go on their Xbox when they're at home. A young man is in the sixth form now. He literally the other day he got up and he said to his teacher, because he was anxious, because he'd got more homework to do, do you expect me to have a life? We know that feeling, don't we? Yeah, and he said it. Oh. And again, then that's difficult, isn't it? Because it's the perception of the other young people in the classroom. He said what we're all thinking, and then it's how you react to that as that staff member. But because the staff member knew that he's on the spectrum, she's able to say, oh, okay, we need to have a think about that, don't we? We need to talk about that. Perhaps we're not going to do it now, but that's the skill that we're looking for. Because we should be able to look at the input that we're putting in to the pieces of work that we're doing. We should be looking at how we make those tasks meaningful and enjoyable, ensuring that the resources are relevant and in the right places, and how they can support with their peers, group work, adult support, and what is expected. And the one thing I would say about what's expected, and I see it a lot, even when you've got lovely writing frames and you've got things laid out and it says, you know, and again, if you go into the standards document, there's lots of resources in there. There's the teacher's handbook that you get from AET, lots of resources in there with lovely writing frames, lovely examples of how they can be used to support the young people. And we move the goalposts. We say this much and then they've finished it. Okay, do another 3 lines for me. Oh, but that wasn't what we agreed. Then the anxiety levels go up. Then we see the behaviours that might be challenging us because we changed the goalposts. So we've got to think, okay, next time we can set more work, but this time we have to say that's what we agreed and we don't change the goalposts. We know this. We talked about this earlier, that they will benefit from having those visual aids, but build it into what we're doing in that curriculum so that we're thinking about it beforehand. Yeah? Having that clear start and end to the tasks. Linking the tasks and interests, adjusting that homework, and making homework accessible to parents. That's one of the other things that sometimes is difficult because we're asking children and young people to do things that is perhaps they might not understand fully, or it might be that we're asking them to find out more about something, but parents themselves might be very anxious about their knowledge about things. So if we do have that young person who's on the spectrum, we know we're going to have to adapt that homework somehow, we know that we might have to do some support with the parents for them to support that young person. Because they're the ones that are going to be sitting there with that young person. So they need to know, if we've got that rule, you've only got 15, you can do 15 minutes, you do this set of tasks, and then you're finished. If they don't know that that's the rule, they won't be able to support that individual. So we need to talk. We need to ensure that that information flows between home and school and doesn't just stay in the classroom. So, observations. I like this little quote. But imagine being told that you had to drop your best subject and have a double lesson in your worst subject. Yeah? You're no good at writing and you're absolutely brilliant at maths. So what do you have to do more of? Writing. Yeah? So what's that going to do? That's going to raise your anxiety levels. That's going to make you less motivated. That's going to make you not want to come to school. That's going to make you not want to see the point of being at school. Okay? So we have to think about how we use our observations to be able to say, okay, what is it that we can do? Because we want to improve that writing, that handwriting, but how can we do it? And I don't think we use observations enough in a general way to be able to access what's actually happening within our classroom settings. And I think it's sometimes about thinking about how observations are done. And again, quite often you have people like myself coming from an outside agency will come into a school classroom and do an observation. And then we're busy tell people what they're doing wrong. Okay? How demotivating is that? You know? I've got to go in, I've got to be able to see the positives that are going on. I've got to tell people the positive things that they're doing. If I'm in that classroom, sometimes I might want to be doing observations myself. So that means I have to have somebody else take the class so I can do those observations. That means I can spot what's motivating that young person. I can spot where they're having particular difficulties at particular times. Because I've got that knowledge and understanding of the 4 areas of difference, I can say, when it does get to be 11:30 and the sun's creeping across there, the sunlight coming in is making a big difference to him. I need to think about where he's sitting, okay? But also, you need to have that trust within the staff within the school, so anybody can come and do an observation. Anybody can come in and be a critical friend. It's not about saying you're doing it wrong, it's about saying, that might benefit this young person, doing that differently. And it's about building up that ethos where it's okay for your teaching assistant to do an observation on the teaching style of that teacher around that individual who's on the autistic spectrum. Because then you'll be supporting that individual, that young person. But it's okay to do that, because what we're doing is we want to make it better. So observations can really be a tool that you can use and you can support staff to use to make a difference for children and young people in those settings. And that's where, you know, the TA support, I think, is something that we do need to think about. Okay? Because, you know, the picture kind of sums it up, doesn't it? It's all juggling all those different things that are needed to be done. But it's about knowing the skills that the TAs can bring and developing those skills. Until the Autism Education Trust 3 levels of training came out, we used to run what we call the lead practitioner course. And we aimed it squarely at teaching assistants in schools in Birmingham. And it was about giving them knowledge and skills around working with young people on the autistic spectrum so that they could take that back to their schools and start to work with the schools, be a champion for this group of young people. So that when, after Nik Morgan's gone away from banging on about changing your curriculum, adapting your classroom, somebody within the school is actually taking that on board. They're actually saying, well, actually, we can make a difference. We can do changes. And where those schools have done really well in adapting their school, you know, looking at the standards now, is where they have somebody that is a lead person. And it works really well, especially in secondary settings, where you can have somebody who is perhaps the person that is the history specialist for children and young people on the autistic spectrum, because they can recognise the skills that those young people might bring to those sessions, and they can recognise the barriers that might be there for them, and they can support the teaching staff to adapt the way in which they present to ensure that all the young people in that class are getting the involvement that they need and getting the access that they need to the curriculum at any given time. So I think that it's really important that we go and we think about all these elements and put them all together in one package, if you like, and think about how we put the jigsaw pieces together to make a whole plan for these young people. I like to think about it sometimes as if we've got building blocks. You know, we need to make a foundation. We need to make a foundation of things that all young people on the spectrum that are coming into a classroom will get. They will get visual clues. They will have had their sensory issues thought about. They will have had some social emotional aspect of their education thought about. They will have thought about how they interact with their peers and what that looks like. We'll have thought about who's doing what, where and when. And we will have some profiles for them that will say that everybody coming in can know that young person is going to be able to, is going to get a consistent approach from what they're doing. Okay, so I've come to the end a bit early there today, but we will have some time for some questions if you want some. I do like this quote again. I started with Einstein and I'm going to finish with Einstein. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. And this is a favourite quote of the young man who had a little outburst in his English lesson the other day. That's what he has still in his low arousal environment that he has at school. That's a little quote that he keeps there. That's one that keeps him going as well. So thank you for listening. I was just wondering if anybody's got any questions I'd like to ask and I could try and answer.
Don't be scared by the microphone.
I mean, anything that people think, you know, that's really hard to do, that's difficult to do, or things that you think you'll go away and think, I'm going to try that out, or I'm going to talk to somebody about that. I mean, unfortunately, I don't know where you're all from. I don't know the settings that you're in. But does anybody feel that there's something they're going to take away from today and say, actually, that's something I'm going to think about? Anybody got a thought? Okay, thank you.
Hi, I mean, I'm from a special school for autism, so obviously this is all very familiar. This is the whole purpose of our school. But our students are students that have been perceived to fail in generic local authority special schools.
Right.
And that's not because they're bad schools, it's just that they're trying to meet the range of such a huge range of young people from profound and multiple learning difficulties through to moderate learning difficulties, and some of those students have dual diagnosis that includes autism as well. And for us in a specialist environment, it's relatively easy. I mean, you've still got difficulties when you've got contrasting students in a small group that might have different sensory sensitivities, etc. But when the whole purpose of our being is geared around autism, it actually makes life quite easy.
Yeah.
I can see how it's hard. Obviously, you said most of your work is in mainstream schools and you're looking at a different set of challenges there. But I think also for colleagues in generic special schools, they have a whole range of challenges where they might be working in a classroom where they've got some students that they're really trying to excite and hype up to get any level of engagement, and other students that are just finding that their sensory overload is because they're being bombarded because you're trying to meet those contrasting needs. And it's just, I don't know if anyone in the room's got any experience of support that those kind of schools get, really, because that's my background. I was, before I moved into autism specific, and I think those schools are often trying to do a really difficult job because that growth of very large generic special schools in local authorities seems to be more prevalent now.
Yeah. And the fact that the special schools are having to show progression as the mainstream schools for this group of individuals, for all the children in their schools, is a difficult task to do, I think. And I think it's difficult in the setting as you've talked about there. And I think it is something that is difficult for us to do within all the different settings. So within that early years setting, within that secondary A-level setting, there is a difficult thing to do to get that balance between how we motivate and encourage all the young people, all those young people with their specific needs that are not autism, and ensure that the young people with autism are still being able to access the curriculum. And I do think it is a juggling act. I just think that if we take one of those things and don't forget about those needs that we've talked about today for the children and young people on the spectrum, that we can begin to make a difference for them as well. So it is a balancing act that we need to do. And as I said before, if you've got a primary classroom that's full of very exciting, lovely displays, exactly what's wanted, exactly what Mr. Ofsted wants when he walks through that door, because at the end of the day, we've got, these are the things, these are the constraints that are on us as well, is that, I'm talking specifically about the individual with autism here, but there's the constraints on the schools as well about saying, Ofsted walks through the door, they want this, they want that, they want to see progress, they want to see, but they do want to see, with the green paper going through, we're looking at SEN as being a high priority on there. They want to see that we're doing something for those children in the schools as well. And it's how we manage that, it's how we juggle that. And I think that sometimes that's where we take our case studies and we start to say, let's look at case studies. Let's take the young person with autism with a case study. Let's take that young person with ADHD. Let's make those case studies. Let's show Ofsted what we're actually doing to meet those needs of those those people. So that child that is in that beautiful classroom, that's got all that environmental stimulus for that group of young people, does have a workstation that's just off to the side, that is somewhere that they can go and work when they need to have less stimulus. And we put that as part of the case study, if you like, for what we're doing, that we can show Ofsted when they walk through the door, if that's the case. Anybody else got any other things they want to say? Thank you for that.
I'd just like to say about the end of day book that I have a son who's autistic, and that's something that we do at home. And I have to say that is really, really beneficial. If you haven't tried doing anything like that, it really is something that works really, really well.
I like it because it's positive. You know, it's about the positive. And it's actually, I talked about working with the emotions scale with a young man the other day, and I don't do happy to sad. I do very, very happy to happy. Because I think because sometimes we talk about all the things that are negative and that's making us sad, when in fact what it is I'm just not as happy as I was, you know. And I think that's just a different spin sometimes on things, is to say, let's look at those positive aspects of things that are happening. So this young man could talk about the fact that he was less happy when he had to talk to his brother, because him and his brother get on each other. But they're trying really hard, and they promised Mum they're going to do it for Christmas. They're going to try not to fight so much. But that's the times when he's less happy than when he's playing with his Lego Star Wars on the stairs, because that's when he's really... So again, I think it's about sometimes remembering that things need to be positive as well. Because, I mean, I don't know your experience, but I know for many parents that thing of that being called into school again, you know, he's done something wrong again. Okay? If something's going wrong that often, why aren't we doing something to change it? Why aren't we doing some observations? Why aren't we doing some thinking about how the environment could be changed or adapting the curriculum so that it stops going wrong? It's not his fault. It's how we support him not to do those things that is causing us to call Mum in again and say, "You've been a naughty boy, sort it out." Well, Mum's not there, you know. Mum's probably got a very good system at home for doing it. Have a chat with her, find out what she's doing, how she manages those stressful times at home. You might be able to use those in the classroom situation as well. Is there somebody else? Sorry.
Your starting point this afternoon was explaining the client base that you work with in Birmingham. And I was particularly interested in you saying that within the secondary sector, you work almost exclusively with children with recognised autism diagnosis. I'm an EP in a local authority, and I've recently inherited some responsibility for the Key Stage 4 provisions for children that have been lost from mainstream.
Yeah.
And it copes with years 10 and 11. And I think that at a conservative estimate, probably in the order of a third of the children in those settings are children who were unable to cope with mainstream settings because their needs weren't recognised. Yeah. And unfortunately, in our location, the waiting list for diagnosis is 3 years. So they're going to be a year gone from the system before anything could be done to recognise their needs. And I'm just interested in your observations or recommendations as to how to try to convince high schools that there are things that it's worth persisting with when they have suddenly come to the realisation that there is an alternative for the last 2 years. But as we'd all accept, a large number of the provisions are run by trusts, they're run on a shoestring, and the children that need the most trained and resourced settings are very often placed in the settings least able to cope with them. Thank you.
The easy answer to that is I haven't got a clue how we do it. If I could do that, I'd probably be in the Barbados on the on the money I'd earned from it. I think where I've seen those children not fall into the gaps, and I know that's not quite your question, but it's where the recognition has been that social communication difficulty, autism, that young person that we're being not labelled but being signposted to is seen earlier on and is developed not in the setting, just in the setting that they're in, but developed in that way that it moves with that young person. So all those sort of things that we talked about, you know, in adapting the curriculum, in adapting the environment for the young people, is something that moves with them. It's I have to say, I still see it lots and lots where a young person has this here, and then when they move to this year group, they don't get it anymore. because the teacher doesn't believe in it, or it's not, you know, and where it's successful is where that moves into along with that young person, and where you have got that advocate for that young person, so perhaps that lead practitioner in the school, where you have got that transition then through into the secondary provision, so that they're not falling through that gap. And I know it doesn't really answer your question, but and we do see it time and time again, where as well, because of late diagnosis, sometimes it's almost as if these young people have burnt their bridges, and then they get a diagnosis, and then suddenly we get a referral, and it says, "Oh, you can do something now," and you kind of feel, well, you've got your lead practitioner in your school, you've been on the AET 3 levels of training. You know, you need to recognise that yourselves, and sometimes it is frustrating to not see that happen, and you see young people fall out of provision because of that. And so, yeah, when we come up with the answer, we'll have a nice holiday. Anybody else? Over here?
I just wanted to ask again about your boys in secondary school. I'm an autism outreach teacher.
Yeah.
I often get the question about year 9s or year 10s not motivated to complete the task. Like you say, no, don't see any point in coming to school.
That's where this... Sorry.
I was going to say, I've been with some of the children, we've looked at pathways, and it's motivated them for a short amount of time when they know their goal, and then it's lost again. I wondered what you did at those times to re-motivate them. And
yeah, it's sometimes, I have to say, is that we've looked at how we can, and again, there's the money constraints on these things, and the constraints within, you know, what schools want from that young person in the curriculum. But we've tried to look at outside provided support as well, so that we can say, again, lots of the young people, one of the ones is always about kind of like football coaching. I'd like to be a football coach, you know. So sometimes we have to ask Aston Villa to come in to do something. But you know, you'd ask the Blues, you'd ask the Birmingham City to come in to do. There are, you know, sometimes it's those little things that it's almost as if they become a little bit of a mentor for that young person, and that's kind of some of the things in the more extremes that we've gone to. But also as well, kind of working on some of the real, I've said we talk about the positives, but some of the things that will be real barriers of negativity. Things like you cannot go and do your football coaching if you can't get a CRB check. And if you have done something that is then seen as being, you know, that would not get you a CRB check, you won't be able to do that. Now, in the school setting, you can begin to sometimes talk about those young people about that. What is that? You know, that behaviour outside of, you know, could end up with you being in the criminal justice system, and that will prevent you from doing that, the job that you want to do. So there's sometimes those kind of tough conversations as well about those things, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, as we all know. But those are some of the things that we have used along the way with pathways of support. Is to say sometimes we need that external motivator as well, and somebody that's perhaps not perceived by the young person as being school. Yeah, because even as an outside agency coming in, we're still seen as being part of school. And sometimes they just need that mentor, if you like. And there does seem to be lots of groups out there that are willing to do those sort of things and are actually actively involved in the schools. But again, this is where schools have got to develop some time to say, okay, we need to actually give training to that group as well around understanding autism, so that they can support those as well, to support the individuals. And that's where we have to think of that outside, that bigger thing, as the bigger picture, if you like, around how we support young people. I mean, we've been lucky enough to be able to train at level 1 at AET, that train level 1. We've trained all the guides that take children and young people to schools in taxis. So that was a real, you know, again, here's somebody that picks that young person up at the start of the day, takes them home at the end of the day, those crucial transition moments, and yet they didn't have any understanding of what the needs of that young person were. what was fascinating when we did do it was actually lots of them did have a lot of insight into that young person, and once you actually start talking to those people as well, involve that in your whole school support, you suddenly find that the guide that's been taking him to school for 7 years actually really knows the tricks and the things that will stop that actually stop some of those behaviours. Again, sorry, I went off your question a little bit, but those are some of the things that, you know, it's about involving some other people sometimes.
Can I just mention I'd rather not.
Yeah.
Can I just mention handwriting?
Handwriting, yeah.
I'm an outreach worker, and I find that handwriting is not necessarily a barrier to learning, but it's a barrier to achievement.
Yeah.
And I think it's difficult getting the message over, but there are alternative ways of doing things.
I mean, I've been in a school. The young man's got his own iPad. He's got Dragon dictation software on there that he uses to put over the things that he wants to do, because his handwriting it labours it, you know, can I get the school just to connect him to the wireless network so he can use his iPad? No. Because there's some rule that says that they can't, and if we do it for him, then everybody will do it, and he'll probably hack the system. I'm with you on the frustrations of those things, and I think the only thing that we can do is we can keep putting those ideas forward, and where they're successful, that's where we can then try and bring those other settings to see where it is successful. And again, this is where these networks of where you've got lead practitioners, whether they're TAs, whether they're Senkos, networks of people who are looking at practice around autism, I find really works. And I mean, in Birmingham, we're a big authority, so we can have lots of little networks of groups of people, but where they're beginning to work together, that's when we're beginning to see them become autonomous in what they're doing. And actually, they're kind of putting me out of a job. But wouldn't that be great? To say, I don't actually need to go there. I don't need to go to that school that often anymore. They've got a whole load of children that are referred to us, but because of what they're doing, because of the way in which they've adapted the way in which they're working, I only need to go in perhaps to work with those children that are at the extreme end, and the school are working and working with the group, with that group of children, which is what should be happening, you know? Because they've adapted their environment. They've looked at the curriculum. They've got alternative ways of working with those young people. Time for one more question, if anybody's got one. They go, no, he said we'd finish it.
An observation.
Yeah.
I was going to say your fish looked very sad, but he looks less than very happy.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening this afternoon. Go have a nice coffee and the rest of the day. Thank you.